Before this story begins, understand one thing. What you are about to hear really happened in America. Men were punished, sold, and worked until they died. Subscribe now, because stories like this must never be forgotten.
The man collapsed face first into the red dirt. Chains clanged as his body hit the ground. The sound was sharp, cold, final. Around him, the sun burned hot, but no one rushed to help. A guard on horseback watched from a distance. He did not move. He did not shout. He did not care. This man was not free. This man was not paid. This man was not expected to survive. He was a prisoner leased to a private company, forced to work from sunrise to darkness, beaten when he slowed, starved when he complained. His name was not written down. His death would not be recorded. By morning, another man would take his place, and the work would go on. This was not ancient history. This was not a rumor. This happened in the United States. But the most shocking part was still coming, because the system that killed him was legal, and the people who made money from his death were protected by law. What followed would trap tens of thousands of men in a cycle so cruel that many historians now call it slavery by another name. And it all began with a loophole. The story of convict leasing began after the Civil War. The war had ended, but the South was broken. Cities were burned, farms were destroyed, money was gone. Former slave owners had lost their workforce, and state governments were desperate. They had prisons full of men. They had no money to run them, and they had one dangerous idea. Instead of paying to feed prisoners, the states decided to rent them out. Private companies could lease prisoners for mines, farms, railroads, and lumber camps. The companies paid the state handed over the prisoners. Food, shelter, safety, medical care, all of that became the company's problem. And many companies solved that problem by not caring at all. Most of the prisoners were black men. Many were arrested for small crimes. Some were arrested for no real crime at all. Laws were written to target them. Vagrancy, loitering, not having proof of work. If you were black and poor, you could be arrested just for standing still. Once arrested, fines were added, court fees piled up. Most could not pay. When they failed, they were sentenced to hard labor. Then they were leased. Chains were locked around their ankles, paperwork was signed, and their lives were sold. Families often never saw them again. At first, the public was told this system was fair. Newspapers said it saved money. Politicians said it reduced crime. Business owners said it helped rebuild the South. But inside the camps, the truth was brutal. Prisoners slept on wooden floors or bare ground. Some slept in cages. Food was thin and spoiled. Water was dirty. Disease spread fast. Injuries were ignored. If a man collapsed, he was beaten until he stood. If he could not stand, he was dragged aside. If he died, he was replaced. Companies had no reason to keep prisoners alive. They could always get more. That was the secret that made convict leasing so deadly. When slavery existed, enslaved people were considered property. Owners wanted to keep them alive, but leased prisoners were disposable. If one died, the company lost nothing. The state sent another. The work never stopped. Some camps lost prisoners at a shocking rate. In certain mines, 1 out of every 3 men died within a year, but the deaths stayed quiet for a long time.
One of the most infamous places was the coal mines of Alabama. Prisoners were sent deep underground with little training. Explosions were common. Cave-ins happened without warning. Toxic air filled the tunnels. Men coughed until they collapsed. Some drowned in flooded shafts. Others were buried alive. Guards carried whips. They used them often. Prisoners who slowed were beaten. Those who tried to escape were hunted. Many were shot. Few escaped, and almost none were believed if they did. By the 1880s, rumors began to spread. Church leaders heard whispers. Journalists received letters. Families asked questions that had no answers. Where did my husband go? Why did my son never return? Why is there no grave? Some reporters tried to investigate. They were blocked. Guards threatened them. Companies denied everything. State officials looked away. Money was flowing. Convict leasing became one of the largest sources of income for southern states. Some states earned more from leasing prisoners than from taxes. Ending it would mean losing millions. So the system stayed, and men kept dying. One night, in a camp far from the nearest town, a prisoner made a decision that would change everything. He was young, thin, weak from hunger. He had been beaten that morning for dropping a tool. That night, he watched another man die beside him. No doctor came. No report was written. The body was dragged away before sunrise. The young man understood something then. If he stayed silent, he would die here too. So he ran. Chains still on his ankles, blood on his feet. He ran through the woods, hiding during the day, moving at night. He knew if he was caught, the punishment would be worse than death. But he kept going. And somehow he reached a town. What he told the people there would shock the nation. And for the first time, the truth about convict leasing would be dragged into the light. But the system was not done killing yet, and the people making money from it were ready to fight back. The courtroom went silent when the man lifted his shackled hands. Everyone could see the scars. They ran across his wrists, his back, his ankles. Old wounds, new wounds, marks that told a story before he even spoke. He stood there, thin and shaking, wearing borrowed clothes, guarded by men who still did not believe he should be free. Then he opened his mouth. "I was worked until I fell," he said. "When I fell, they beat me. When I begged, they laughed. When men died, they were dragged away like trash." People gasped. This was not a criminal trying to escape punishment. This was a witness describing a system designed to break human beings. His name was Green Cottenham, and he had escaped from a coal mine in Alabama. What he told the court would tear a hole in the lies that had protected convict leasing for decades. But the people who made money from pain were listening too, and they were angry. Green had been arrested for vagrancy. No job, no proof of work. That was enough. He was fined more money than he had ever seen. When he could not pay, the judge sentenced him to hard labor. Within days, he was leased to a coal company. No trial about safety, no questions about health, no limit on punishment. From the first morning, the rules were clear. Work until dark, do not stop, do not speak, do not slow down. Guards watched from above, rifles resting across their knees. Whips hung from their belts like tools. Green described how men were fed rotten food, how water was shared from muddy pools, how sickness spread quickly in the damp tunnels. He spoke about men coughing blood and still being forced to dig. If a man died, Green said, they just sent another. The room filled with whispers. This was no longer rumor. This was sworn testimony. Newspapers picked up the story. Headlines spread across the country. People who had never heard the words convict leasing now asked questions. How could this be legal?
Why were prisoners dying? Who allowed this? State officials responded with calm faces and empty words. They said abuses were rare. They said prisoners exaggerated. They said the system was necessary. Behind closed doors, panic set in. Companies feared losing cheap labor. Politicians feared losing money. Prison officials feared losing power. So they did what they always did. They attacked the witness. Green was called a liar, a criminal, a troublemaker. Guards claimed he was treated well. Records suddenly appeared saying deaths were low. Inspections were announced in advance so camps could clean up before visitors arrived. For a moment, it seemed like the truth would be buried again. But something had changed. People were watching now. Journalists began sneaking into camps. Some posed as workers, others bribed guards. What they saw matched Green's story almost exactly. Men chained together, men beaten for resting, men dying without names. One reporter wrote that convict leasing was worse than slavery because no one cared if the men survived. That line spread fast. Church leaders spoke out, labor groups protested, families demanded answers. For the first time, pressure came not just from the outside, but from inside the states themselves. Still, change was slow. Too slow for the men still trapped in camps. In one lumber camp in Mississippi, prisoners worked knee-deep in water for hours. Snakes moved through the mud. Mosquitoes swarmed constantly. Fever spread fast. When a man collapsed, the guard kicked him. When he did not move, the guard left him there. By morning, he was gone. In Georgia, prisoners were forced to work on railroads using heavy tools without protection. Explosions killed groups of men at once. Survivors were ordered back to work the same day. The message was clear. Your life is worth less than the work you produce. By the early 1900s, some states began to feel ashamed. Others felt exposed. Finally, Alabama announced it would end convict leasing. People celebrated.
But the celebration was early, because the system did not disappear. It changed shape. Instead of leasing prisoners to private companies, states began using them directly. Chain gangs appeared. Prison farms expanded. Road camps formed. Prisoners still worked long hours. Punishments were still harsh. Deaths still happened. The names changed. The suffering stayed. Convict leasing was officially dead, but forced labor lived on under state control. The same laws that allowed prisoners to be worked without pay still existed. One sentence in the Constitution made it possible. A single line that said forced labor was allowed as punishment for a crime. That line became the shield. Green Cottonham did not live to see real justice. Many men who testified disappeared from records soon after. Some were rearrested. Others died poor and sick. Their names faded, but their words remained. Historians later uncovered the truth. Convict leasing was not a mistake. It was not an accident. It was a business model. States earned millions. Companies rebuilt cities. Railroads expanded. Coal-powered factories. And all of it was fueled by bodies that could not say no. Bodies that were worked to death. Today, many Americans have never heard this story. Schools barely mention it. Textbooks skip past it. But the impact is still there. Prison labor still exists. Prisoners still earn little or nothing. The system still profits from punishment. And the question remains, if the past was allowed to be this cruel, what is happening now that we are not being shown? Because systems like this do not vanish on their own. They wait in the dark. And in the next chapter, we uncover how convict leasing ended on paper, but survived in silence, and why some people still defend it today.
The chains were supposed to be gone. That was the promise. Newspapers said convict leasing was over. Politicians gave speeches. Laws were signed. People believed the worst was finished. They believed prisoners would no longer be sold. They believed the deaths would stop. But deep in the South, before sunrise, men were still being marched out to work. They were thinner now, quieter, still watched by guards with guns, still punished for slowing down, still buried without names when they collapsed. Only the words had changed. The suffering had not. After convict leasing was officially banned, states faced a problem. They still had prisoners, they still wanted cheap labor, and they still believed punishment should hurt. So they created a new system: chain gangs. Men were shackled together by iron chains. If one fell, all felt it. They worked on roads, farms, and state projects from dawn until dark. Heat burned their skin. Cold froze their hands. Guards rolled alongside them, ready to strike. Escaping was almost impossible. If one man tried to run, the others would drag down with him. This made prisoners police each other. Fear replaced hope. Silence replaced resistance. It was control perfected.
Prison farms became another answer. States bought huge pieces of land. Prisoners were sent there to grow crops, dig ditches, and clear swamps. The work was endless. The pay was nothing. The punishment was severe. Some farms became known for their cruelty. Men were whipped for talking, starved for mistakes, locked in cages for days. Disease spread fast. Medical care was rare. Deaths were still hidden. But now the state itself was in charge. There was no company to blame. One of the most infamous places was Parchment Farm in Mississippi. It was called a prison, but it looked like a plantation. Prisoners worked cotton fields under armed guards. Many were black men convicted of small crimes. Some had no lawyers. Some had no real trials. They lived in wooden barracks. Heat filled the air. Rats ran across the floors. Punishments were harsh and public. If a man resisted, he was made an example. Others watched and learned to obey. The public saw chain gangs on roads and thought it was justice. They saw prisoners working and believed it made them better. Few asked how long the men worked. Few asked how often they were beaten. Few asked how many never came back. Out of sight, out of mind. That silence allowed the system to survive. But over time, voices rose again. Former prisoners spoke. Journalists returned. Doctors reported injuries that could not be explained. Churches questioned whether this punishment matched the crime. Slowly, pressure grew. Not enough to stop prison labor, enough to hide it better. By the mid-1900s, chain gangs faded from public roads. Prison farms reduced their brutality on paper. Guards were told to follow rules. But inside the walls, labor continued. Factories were built inside prisons. License plates were stamped. Furniture was made. Clothes were sewn. Prisoners worked for pennies or nothing at all. Some states paid them cents per hour. Others paid nothing. Refusal meant punishment. Solitary confinement, loss of food, loss of visits. The choice was never real. Supporters said prisoners deserved it. They said work taught discipline. They said it saved taxpayer money. Critics said it looked too familiar, because the same groups were still suffering the most, because the same laws still filled prisons with the poor, because the Constitution still allowed forced labor after conviction. The loophole remained. Families of those who died under convict leasing never received justice. No trials, no apologies, no graves in many cases. Records were lost or destroyed. Names disappeared. But the impact stayed. Communities were broken. Generations grew up without fathers. Fear of the law deepened. Trust was destroyed. Convict leasing did not just kill bodies, it shaped lives. Today, when prisoners fight wildfires, work farms, or staff factories, many people praise the system. They call it rehabilitation. They call it opportunity. But others ask hard questions. Who profits? Who decides the pay? Who controls the punishment? And what happens when someone refuses? Convict leasing may be gone in name, but its shadow is long.
It taught the system that punishment could be profitable. It taught the system that silence could be enforced. It taught the system that lives could be measured in output. That lesson was never fully unlearned. The men who were worked to death never imagined their suffering would echo this far. They never knew their pain would become history. They only knew hunger, fear, and exhaustion. And the sound of chains. Chains that still exist in different forms, different words, same weight. The question hangs in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. If convict leasing ended more than 100 years ago, why does it still feel familiar? That question is the reason this story matters. Because when people finally look closely, they realize something disturbing. Convict leasing did not disappear because it was cruel. It ended because it became embarrassing. It ended because too many people saw the bodies, the scars, the graves with no names. But the idea behind it survived. The idea that punishment should produce profit. The idea that prisoners are tools, not people. The idea that suffering is acceptable if it is legal. That idea never died. Today, millions of prisoners across the United States work every day. They fight fires, they clean highways, they farm land, they manufacture goods. They do work that keeps states running. Some are paid pennies, some are paid nothing. Many have no choice. If they refuse, they are punished. They lose phone calls, they lose visits. They are locked alone in small rooms for days or weeks. The work is called voluntary, but when refusal brings pain, the word loses its meaning. Supporters say prison labor helps inmates learn skills. They say it reduces boredom. They say it prepares people for life after release. Sometimes that is true, but the darker truth exists at the same time. Private companies still make money. States still save money. Prisoners still have little power. And the Constitution still allows forced labor as punishment for a crime. That one sentence remains untouched. When historians look back at convict leasing, they do not ask how it happened. They asked why it was allowed for so long. The answer is simple and terrifying. It was legal, it was profitable, and it mostly harmed people society did not protect. That same pattern still appears today. Families of men worked to death under convict leasing never received justice. There were no apologies, no compensation, no official memorials in most places. Their suffering was written out of history. But memory has a way of surviving. Through stories, through records, through voices that refuse to stay silent. When you hear the sound of chains and old photographs, remember this. Those chains were not just metal. They were laws. They were decisions. They were choices made by people in power. And choices can be changed. Convict leasing teaches us something important. Cruel systems do not always announce themselves as cruel. They often hide behind rules, paperwork, and profit. They survive because people stop asking questions. The moment people stop looking away, the system weakens. That is why this story is told. Not to shame the past alone, but to warn the present. Because the real danger is not what America once did. The real danger is believing it could never happen again. If this story made you uncomfortable, that is the point. If it made you angry, that is understandable. If it made you think, then it did its job. The men who were worked to death never got an ending, but we do. And the ending depends on whether we remember, question, and refuse to accept cruelty just because it is written into law. The chains only stay strong when no one tries to break them. And now you know where they came from. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. These truths survive only when they are shared. Subscribe to this channel for real stories history tried to hide, because silence is what allowed this to happen.